Fan the music, and I always like to start by asking, outside of songwriting, how much writing do you do, whether it's journaling or any of that stuff? Do you do other types of writing outside of songwriting?
I think it's something I've definitely come back to in the last couple of years. When I was at university, because I didn't necessarily regard myself as a very organized, pragmatic person, so going to do a law degree seemed quite odd. And I do think that a lot of the feedback I got during my first year was don't write like this, write like this, and it was just such a foreign way of communicating to me. So I think I had to just kind of get my head around that. But when I was in the final years of uni, I started going to like creative writing workshops at like the Borders Books that was in Glasgow and things like that. And I've always been a big reader, but I think when the band started touring, it's very difficult to get a quiet corner to read in when you're in a van with a bunch of lads. And I just kind of lost touch with that a little bit. And then I would always keep notebooks when we were driving around, and I write down words and phrases and thoughts as I think of them. But yeah, definitely in the last couple of years, I think the touring of the third album, it was very therapeutic for me to sit down and just write stuff out, whether it's a stream of consciousness of what I'd been thinking about, or like I have this little jar that sits on my desk here that I kind of cut out words and phrases and I put them in there if I see something cool and weird, just to, I don't know, it felt freeing to create something that wasn't for the band purely, and I could take something, I could just write a small piece of, whether it's a prompt for why do you feel like this about something, or it's just a little teeny tiny story that nobody will ever see. I think it was really nice to reconnect with writing in that way rather than writing for an end product. Not product, so I don't want to think about music as a product, but it was helpful to kind of take my head out of the band a little bit. And ultimately, I think it helped the lyrics on the new record have more of a storyteller feel to them, because I think my head was more aligned with that space.
Do you think, is it important to write, outside of songwriting every day? Or, when it's just not happening, do you feel like you shouldn't push it because things become derivative?
I think for the songwriting specifically, and like I do need to have filled up the cup a bit in order to write things. Like I think the songs that I've written where I'm like, about, it's not because the music wasn't great or because of those things, it's just that your own performance. I was like, yeah, but you've said that already. You didn't really, I feel like that's the worst thing I can do. Like at this point, I know the DNA of if a robot AI could make a Chvrches song. Now, sometimes if I'm a bit stuck, then I can write that, but I don't think that that's the best Chvrches songs. I think, So if I'm a bit stuck on those things, I think I don't know. I used to be like, oh, you can't write if you don't get struck by the muse. But now I also think you can't expect the muse to strike you just randomly if you're not putting in the time. So I feel like it's balanced between the two things for me. And if I'm really stuck on a song and I've worked on it for a few hours, I'll be like, well, go away and do something else. Go away. And I try and make sure I do something creative each day, because otherwise I start feeling a bit weird, whether it's like just writing something random in a notebook or watching something and then be like, well, what do I think about that? And how could you tell that story in another way? Or I don't know, just something. Because otherwise, there's a lot of admin involved in being in a band and a lot of like the business of the showbiz, So I think I am the admin one in the band because of my previous life. I'm very good at emails, etc. But sometimes I feel like if that's all I do, then I disconnect with the other part of it. And I think that's why it's so difficult for me to write on tour, because so much of that is like press, promo, persona, be this person. And I don't think that person writes very well. I think the kind of sad, soft, worried me can't go on tour, and she's the one that writes better, I think.
Do you have creative go-tos? You said, when it's important to do something creatively every day. I
don't succeed all the time, but
do you draw? Like, what are those creative, like, do you have certain creative things you go to when you find the writing just isn't happening?
I guess I feel like it'll always, like, because I'm so like lyric focused, like I'm not the main melody writer in the band, I'm like the lyrics guy. So, and then also because the melody is already written, I feel like in some ways that's really good because the possibilities aren't infinite. You have to fill this space. But in some ways you're just like, oh, there's only 4 lines and you need the syllables to be exactly like this. And some days that's good and some days it's just not happening. So for me, any kind of writing that isn't that is quite freeing. So if I'm really stuck on something with the band, maybe I'll just write out something that could just be journally, or it could be about something that I want to do, or something that I saw, or just like a little crap, teeny tiny short story for me that nobody will see. And I think it almost is like, it's just like an unblocking tactic. I'm sure the guys in the band would disagree because they'd be like, oh, she's blocked for weeks. And I'm blocked for weeks on that one song.
Yeah.
I can write other stuff, just not sometimes. Yeah. And I think sometimes you can work on something for weeks and weeks, and then the idea will come when I'm in the shower or when I'm like chopping vegetables, and I'll be like, oh, that's the thing. And you have to run and write it down before you forget, before it escapes.
Okay. So I'm fast. I just had an interview before this, and I'm fascinated by this topic because the role of movement to the creative process. Now, I think we can kind of like bunch this into many buckets. The first is the things that happen when you're on a bus, on a plane, train, car, van, whatever. Then there are the movements. You mentioned chopping vegetables, because I hear cooking, I hear gardening. I heard vacuuming today for the first time. Never heard vacuuming before. And then there's the walking, the running, the hiking, the biking, the locomotion, because those things. So I've got a whole theory behind this, or I don't have a theory, I've got ideas, I guess. So there's the movement, there's the hiking, the biking, the walking, where the cadence tends to introduce melodies. And then there's the vacuuming, the chopping vegetables, the things like that, where it's rote, and then your mind can focus on those things. So I'd love to explore that because I'm fascinated by this. And I guess my question is, you may not know the answer to this, I don't know the answer to this, but how is chopping vegetables better than doing nothing when it comes to writing? Because I'm totally with you on this. I agree. But let's talk about that, because I'm fascinated by that topic, the whole role of movement in general to the creative process.
I mean, I find it so interesting too, because to me, I'm like, well, surely you should be able to push your brain to find the thing. But I guess I'm not a scientist. I don't know. But it feels to me when those things happen that it's almost like my brain has 2 different modes, and like conscious brain and subconscious brain are doing different things at different times. And like whenever I was stuck, obviously not during 2020, but whenever I would have writer's block on previous records, I go for a drive, I sit on a train. I've done a lot of writing on trains, especially the first 2 Chvrches albums. There's only one subway in Glasgow, and it goes clockwise and counterclockwise. And I would just sit on this little train. But I think the rhythm of it, and like cafes, background noise in cafes helps somehow. And I think things that are like, there is a rhythm to like a hubbub in the background. And I read that David Lynch book about meditation, catching the big fish, like all that stuff. And I feel like the way he talks about it is that it's almost like this hubbub is meditative, and it allows your subconscious to do the stuff that it's supposed to do, sort of.
Yeah.
So, and water, for some reason, being near water always makes me feel better. Maybe because I'm from a small island, I guess. Britain is very small. But and I think that if whether it's a river or a lake or the sea or any of those things, I think just the natural cadence, as you say, like the breathing in, the breathing out, feels like it, I don't know, pushes something in your brain. And that sounds very woo-woo, but I do think that's what's great about making any kind of art, is that you can technically write out academically how you should do it, but there's always this section that can't really be explained. And so much of life is facts, not feelings, but art is like feelings, not facts. Like the songs that we have done that I'm most proud of are you don't know where they come from. You can talk about it all you want, but like no one really knows what that bit is, that just moment. Nobody knows how to, you can't teach that. I don't know. Maybe you could, because you're very good at that.
No, and it's funny because I always think it's interesting when songwriters always in these interviews make this motion of, and I just pull it out of the ether. I pull it out.
Yes, whatever this is, the flappy hand action.
It's here. And I always get this motion in interviews, and I just pull it. And I think no songwriter has ever said, it was just sitting there on the ground and I picked it up, or it was over there on the table. It's always, and I'm sure that has to do with the ideas of divine inspiration, religion aside, but no one ever says, I was walking along and that song was there on the ground. I just picked it up. It's always out of here. I don't know. Why is that? but yeah, it's and I've heard swimming too. I forgot to mention swimming. I mean, it's you know, that swimming tends to be. I interviewed Liz Fair, and she talked about how there's certain strokes in the pool that give her better song ideas.
And her book is I've just finished reading her book, and she's so interesting in the way that she talks about writing and process, and because she's a visual artist and a songwriter, I find that really interesting at how she, and so honest. Like, I think there's so many people that make talking about making art very, like, not elitist or pretentious, but it just, you know, that I think you center yourself in that moment and make it about you, and it is about you because it's about you making your art, but it's also like, it's just kind of random a lot of the time. It's just kind of accident. And I love the way that she talked about that, because she's obviously clearly one of my favorite writers of all time. I love her so much.
I think she said something about even a good flip turn in the pool was a great way to elicit ideas.
I gotta have to start swimming.
See, I know. But have song ideas ever come to you when you're on a walk or biking, you know, that independent of like cars and stuff like that, but when you're actually moving, like biking or walking, any recall anything like that? Or
it's very nice of you to presume that I exercise and go outside, but I guess yes, in terms of, like, I think last year I was very afraid of the outdoors for a lot of that time, but so much so that my partner who I live with was like, you need to, like, go outside. It's okay, you can go outside. You don't have to go inside when you get outside, but you should just walk. And there's a tiny little park near us, so I would kind of take my notebook and not listen to music on the walk, just like I'll be like, okay, soak up outside sounds for your mental well-being. Come on, everything's fine. A little vitamin D will do you good. But then by the time I get to the park, like 25 minutes later, I'm like, it's almost like you've workshopped stuff. Yeah. And I think sometimes on like the drive home or the walk home from the studio, because Martin from the band lives about a mile from me. And I'm the only person in Los Angeles who walks anywhere, I think. Unless it's really hot, because I'm still British. But yeah, by the time I would get home, like the thing that we've been banging our heads against the wall about, I would have, like, by the time I get home, I'd be like, I think it's this and this and this, and just send him a little voice memo. I also have lots of like just silly sounding voice memos from like driving and having an idea, or like sometimes I wake up in the nighttime and I think I have a good idea, and then I'll listen to those recordings again. Some of them are really not good. Some of them are just a sleepy woman kind of licking her phone and like, I love it. But some of them I'm like, oh yeah, that was the answer. Just like the little tweaks where it's like, how do you get that should be more alliterated, or that should be this, like those little moments. It's always like the just before I fall asleep bits where those come in. It's kind of odd.
Yeah.
But again, I suppose your conscious brain is checked out, so your subconscious can do the proper work, I guess.
And so there's a book you should read called The Friendship by Adam Sisman. It's a book about the friendship between Wordsworth and Coleridge, the two romantic poets. And they talked about how almost both of those guys did almost all their composing while on walks, because they estimated Wordsworth walked 100,000 miles in his life, which if you do the math comes out to like some absurd number of like 30 miles a day for 30 years or something like that. And I know they both composed almost all their poems on walks. And Wordsworth, I may get it wrong, but Wordsworth liked flat terrain and Coleridge liked rocky terrain. And Wordsworth would, not only would he compose, he'd edit the poets on his walks and wouldn't come back until they were fully formed.
That's commitment.
That's impressive. Yeah.
Yes.
But I've heard that a lot too. And like I said, whether it's the momentum, whether it's the cadence of the limbs, but I find that fascinating. Especially with the chopping vegetables and the cooking and the gardening and the vacuuming, that those kind of mundane, again, what I'm interested is how a mundane event like that, which on some level must require a little bit of brain power, especially chopping vegetables where you don't want to cut your fingers off.
Yeah, I do still have all 10. So
say exactly how that is still better than, than nothing. But I interviewed, there was another songwriter recently who, to get out of a rut, he puts two radios in front of his computer on either side, but each tuned to a different station. One might be talk radio, one might be, hard rock. And it's the chaos that turns his editor off. So the chaos drives his editor crazy, and his editor gets the hell out of the way, and he's able to write. So it's almost like, yeah, it's the chaos of the sounds, and he's not paying attention to either of them, but he gets the hell out of the way of his own way when he writes, when he does that.
I mean, that sounds like torture to me, but maybe one day when I'm stuck, I'm going to be like, all right, here I go.
There you go. Do you go back to those journals when you're stuck? You know, you're in a rut, you go back, let me leaf through these, or go to that jar and say, I need some, do you use those ever to jumpstart ideas?
Yes, a lot of the time. Yeah. Whenever I've told people this, they've been like, this sounds like the least creative thing I've ever heard. But I also think that sometimes I need, I don't know, some kind of organization, so I'm not just like fishing for an idea in like a limitless expanse. So when I was going into this record, the Screen Violence record we just put out, I knew that I had like, sorry, there's a really large truck outside my house. I hope that's not ruining your audio.
Can't even hear it.
Okay, great. I knew that I had maybe 2 years worth of journals since the last time we'd written, but that just felt like too much to tackle. Like that's too big a mountain to leaf through and hope that something jumped out. So I kind of went through and put it in a spreadsheet, because at the very beginning of the band, when I joined, Chvrches had a couple of songs already, and that's how Ian and Martin would write lyrics for those songs, was they would just kind of write phrases they liked and then pick out of the spreadsheet. And then I think mine's a bit more focused than that, but I took everything and I broke it down into tabs. So there would be like a tab for horror, a tab for sadness, tab for anger, and I just kind of, so that when I heard like the instrumental, I would kind of know, it just helped focus it a little more, I think. And I think those, most of the time now, the writing prompt will either be something that's in those spreadsheets, or it'll be a phrase I think of when I hear the line. But I think, yeah, it helps make it more like thematically concise for the whole record, I think, knowing that there was a pool of words that I was working from, like a mood board that was already set, sort of.
I'll be honest with you, that's not that uncommon.
Is it? Okay, good.
It is not.
Good.
I could tell you stories about songwriters who have those things meticulously organized, spreadsheets, color-coded folders that they carry around. Oh yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, I think it's far more common than you think. They just don't want people to know, because, it makes it look too organized and loses that, the
romance of it,
the spontaneous element of it.
Well, and I guess it's interesting because most people in my life, work-wise and musically, aren't necessarily the lyric writer. So I don't, like, I have, friends in bands who are the lyric writer, but not like close friends. So I guess, yeah, I think especially within churches, like the guys know what kind of lyrics they like, but they've never been the lyric writer in a band. So yeah, when I'm like, guys, I have my spreadsheet, they're like, oh, of course Lauren's got a spreadsheet. Doesn't she just love to organize things? And I'm like, no, there's a creative purpose. I'm not just being uptight.
Right. Now I see you holding a pen, and I could do an entire website dedicated to the pens and pencils and types of notebooks and types of paper of songwriters, because you as a group seem to be enormously dedicated. Not all of you, but some of you. It's got to be a certain color, got to be a certain brand of pen, got to be a certain type of. So I guess, first of all, when it comes to lyrics, are you a pen and paper or a computer person? I guess we'll start with that.
Kind of a hybrid. Like, for some reason, if I write stuff down on my phone, I always want to transfer it to the notebook, because I'm fearful of, like, I want there to be an archive of this stuff, maybe for me to look back through, because I think also I can be too overly edity. So if it's just in a phone or a computer, I'll just delete stuff. And sometimes I've looked back at things I've crossed out, and those are the best things. You cross them out because they make you uncomfortable, not because they're bad. So I like having like a black and white document of it. And yeah, I think I've had big notebooks, small notebooks. If they're too small, they fit better in your handbag, but they're not as good for writing. And I like the kind of half A4 size. I like it to be lined. That's just right. But sometimes, honestly, I'm like, it's weird, because even as a kid, I was really, really into stationery. But I think you write different kinds of things. And I remember reading like the morning pages advice and all that stuff. And her whole advice is that you write it out by hand because there's something in that and that your brain engages in a different way than when you're
Different
typing.
part of the brain.
And what a kindness that my boyfriend did for me during the pandemic was, it was the first time I'd gone into Target and I was like, this is very scary. There's lots of, everything in our house is breaking. We have to fix it. And then he was like,
right.
I had to go get some paper for the printer when I was in the stationery aisle, clearly like in my own world, thinking about things. He was like, do you want to tell me what your favorite ones are? I was like, yes. I was like, these Post-its seem cool, but this is a gimmick. They're too small. They won't be useful for anything. These Post-its are too large. And then he was just like, wow, you're an insane person.
That's very detailed.
I don't know why. I was like, there's obviously some kind of anxiety and control problems in there. But yeah, I don't know. I think I write better if I have the tools that, because I'll just be procrastinating and uncomfortable. And if you can remove the procrastination and discomfort, but I love stealing pens, I have to say, not from shops, but this is a hotel pen. Whenever I go to hotels that have got nice pens, I'm like, I'm gonna be having that. Like, and it's nice because it's a memory as well. Like, it feels like it's a memory of a place. And if it's got a nice action, I'm gonna take that home, no mistake.
But I think the ritual, I mean, I'm fascinated. I read these Paris Review interviews with writers all the time about the writing, about the ritual of the process. And I think it's confidence, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if that chair behind me makes me a better writer, but that's where I write. And you know what? I edit in another chair because I don't like to do, I feel like I need that different space to do a different part of the process. And so, but I think that ritual is important because I think for me, you got to know where it works the best. And yes, I think we can be amorphous about it and say, oh, it doesn't really matter. But then at some level, there must be places where you've gotten some amazing writing done. So how important is that to you? I guess that ritual to the process, time of day, place, how important is that for you to get a good writing session done?
I think especially for lyrics, it's definitely a big part of it. Like, we've been into some big fancy pants studios over the course of our time, and we've worked with some big fancy pants people, but those, like, most of the sessions we did with outside writers never saw the light of day because I feel like we weren't comfortable in those spaces, or it wasn't a great combination of people, and don't really write very well in a big white shiny studio. Like, to me, I'm like, I don't think that's where, like, the things I think I want to say, it feels like not safe for them to be birthed in that space, sort of. I don't know. But yeah, I definitely, comfort and confidence. It's interesting you say that. I've never thought about it like that. But yeah, like, if you're not getting on quite right, sometimes that's good conflict for saying something that you would be too shy to say if someone's just pissed you off. But most of the time, I'm like, I don't think I write well under conflicted circumstances. But yeah, definitely last year, because we couldn't leave the house, I was like, I have to sit in different places once this space has almost run out of juice, kind of, or I get to the point where now I'm procrastinating when I wasn't 2 days ago. But if I sit at this, I just have to go in a little system because I can't go to the cafe, I can't go on the train, I can't do those things. So I was like, there was like 2 days where I was like, I'm gonna write on the bed, and I'm like, on the bed. Pre-2020 me would have been like, no, you don't bring the writing into the sleep space. And then I'm like, let's try it in the sleep space, maybe something will happen in there. And I think maybe I want to be more open to those things, but know when it's just not gonna work, if it's too clinical or something. I don't know.
Does time of day matter? Are you a daytime, nighttime? Does that matter?
I don't work well super late at night in like a band session. I think I just get like noise fatigue, I think. Even if it's lovely, wonderful noise, after a point, I'm like, my brain is just like, nah. But so most of the writing, I think earlier in the morning is a good time for like new ideas. And then I feel like I'll workshop it in the afternoon, and then early evening is probably when I'm like, yes, I got it. So I feel like I'll text my partner in the middle of the day and be like, I have nothing. I'll never write again. I'm a terrible piece of shit. What a waste of time. And then by the time he gets home at like 7 o'clock, I'm like, I think I did it. And he's like, great. Happy to have been on this very dramatic journey with you. So, but every time, I don't know why. And if he tries to politely point out and be like, yeah, but that's just the process and it'll happen. And I'm like, you don't know. Maybe that was the last one. Maybe it's over for me, and everyone's going to find out I don't know what I'm doing, and that was the last good idea I'll ever have. And I get very like, oh, woe is me, dramatic. And then by 8 p.m. I'm like, so I think I have a good outline, and like, it's just, that's part of the the drama is part of the thing. I don't know. I don't
It
know.
is. I mean, when I taught on the college level, I told my students, if you think of the writing process as only happening when pen goes to paper, that's the wrong way to look at it. Your writing process is taking place when you're eating, when you're sleeping, when you're walking, when you're doing anything. If you look at it that way, I think it takes the stress off of, I mean, you're getting ideas in there whether you know it or not just when you're putting pen to paper, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a good way to
And a
look at
lot
it.
of the time, my boyfriend's a musician as well, so a lot of the time we'll work during the day, and then at nighttime we'll make dinner, we'll sit down to watch TV, and without fail, one person's gonna be like, oh, and write something down, or he'll have to go away and quickly record a bit of guitar or something. But at least we both know what that's like. So if
Yeah.
we're like, pause, we're like, catch it, don't let it get away.
Right.
So yes, I think that'd be worse if somebody was like, what, your work day ended, leave work there. But I think I don't like to talk about writing as work, because I think, promo is work, touring is a privilege, but also work to a degree. But writing is not. I don't know. No, there's not. It doesn't feel like a job to me. It feels
Yeah.
like I don't like to think about it as like it's a craft. You work at your craft. It's not like you go to work every day. Like, I don't know. Well, what a luxury, to get paid to do something you
Exactly.
definitely do for free.
Yeah. Do you, in that revision process, do you revise a lot of your lyrics? What is that process like for you?
I think I've gotten better at it over the course of time. I think maybe because of a lack of confidence or a lack of, like, I'd written lyrics in previous bands, but I had never been the main singer in previous bands. So I would write when I was singing or write for somebody else. And, I had never been in this context until this band. So I feel like I did a lot of that growing up in front of people, which was, like, in a way good because it was just pure instinct, but I think stressful in another way because you're always like, fuck, I'm gonna get found out, everyone's gonna realize I don't know what I'm doing. How do I write as this person in this band? And I don't think that was the best way to look at it sometimes. So yeah, I look back on, like, maybe there's a couple of songs in the Chvrches canon and I'm like, really, that to me sounds like writer's block, what you've written. So I would go back and be like, you could do better than that. I think it's about a level of confidence where you're like, it's not that every song is going to be the best song or has to be the same, but I think, yeah, it's about like holding yourself to a standard and trusting that you could do better. I used to be too scared to rewrite because I'd be like, oh, there's probably nothing better, leave me alone. But now I feel like there's one song on the new record that just came out that had like 4 different sets of lyrics because I was like, it's just not right. It's not right. I don't know why, but it's not right. And I think that, yeah, or I'm very like fiddly with like specific words. Like Ian and I had a long discussion about this sort of song on the record called Final Girl. And he was like, oh, but then isn't it more purposeful to say there's a final girl and you know that she will be screaming? And I was like, no. It was like she should be, because the meaning of should be is really different from will be, and the alliteration on that point it has to be that. And he was like, okay, maniac. But I don't know, I just felt, and I was like, the meaning of should, like, it's like the societal expectation, or like she should, everything about it makes it seem like she should be screaming, and she will be or would be. I'm like, nah, changes the meaning, I don't like it. And then they're like, one word, get a grip. But to me, I'm like, those are the things I'll rewrite till they feel like they're definitely correct, even though there is no correct. But in my really narcissistic view of the writing, I'm like, it is now correct. Like, it doesn't make sense.
See, I see this as the difference between should and will as your law training, right? It's that's the first thing I thought of in those contracts and things like that.
What is the definition of, I remember even looking at the band contracts and be like, what is the definition of reasonable promo? When the band says they commit to reasonable promo, I'm like, who decides? Who decides?
Who knows?
But yeah, maybe sometimes I think about that and I'm like, I just didn't use the reading writing of the law degree anywhere, but maybe I did subconsciously. I don't know.
All right, a couple more questions. So Hemingway always said that he couldn't write about Paris when he was in Paris. He needed distance from that place to be able to write about it. So how important is, whether you're writing about an emotion or an event or a place, how important is distance, or is immediacy more important?
I think for me, a hybrid. Like, I think that's why the journaling has become such an important part of things for me, because when I write those things, especially a lot of the songs that made it onto Screen Violence, like the immediate, there is an immediacy when it comes to fear, when it comes to that kind of pain, when it comes to that kind of isolation. And I think I'm glad I captured those things in that moment, but I'm glad that we didn't write the songs then. So if that's like my little paint palette to paint from, then I think you need a bit of distance to tell a better, I don't know, to tell a more fully realized story, if that makes sense. I think.
With emotions, though, I wonder if like the rawness of an emotion is hard to write about.
Right, when it's happening.
Happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like when I look back at those notebooks, I'm like, there are lines from songs like Violent Delights or How Not to Drown and Final Girl that were in those notebooks, but they were part of like 2-page long stream of consciousness diatribes where it's just panic, it's just fear. And I think, when I look at that, I'm like, well, you couldn't take that and set that to music and say that would be a good song, but there's an honesty in there, and like like a kind of not animalistic, I don't know, like an impulse response to a situation. And I think I'm like, okay, how do you take that element of it and as you say, have a little distance to actually have some perspective and talk about it in a way that is a bit better representation of it, sort of.
So you mentioned paint. Good segue into my next question. I'm not, it's funny, I'm not even a huge Hemingway fan, but I read this quote recently. I do like Hemingway, but I'm not obsessed with him. But he said, I read something recently where he said, I think something about all writers should go to art galleries as a way for, and I read that recently and I thought about that. Like, what do you think about that? Do you go to art galleries? Is that ever a source of inspiration for you? Because I'd have to go back into why he said that, but I think he definitely was pretty adamant about that.
Well, I think it's
or
definitely...
maybe other types. Sorry, maybe not just art galleries. Maybe if that's not the answer, if it's not art galleries, maybe other types of art to get inspiration.
100%. Yeah, I think if anything, when we're writing, I listen to less music. Like I kind of listen to almost no music when we're writing because I'm conscious that. And maybe it's a fear of accidentally lifting something, or my ears are tired or whatever. So I do feel like I get a lot of not inspiration, but stimulus from like watching films or TV or reading books or listening to podcasts or visual art stuff. Like a friend of mine works with a lot of artists, and he was incredibly helpful for this record because he would just text me images. Once I told him what the concept was, he'd be like, do you know this person? Do you know this person? He would just send me links to things. And then that became a huge part of building this new record because it's such a specific concept that we're talking about. And then I was making like mood boards and sending them to the guys. And I feel like, it was helpful for me to, if I get stuck, I would just kind of look through my mood board at some of the imagery, and I think that really informed there being more imagery in the lyrics. And even stuff like sometimes if I know that I want to write a certain feeling, I'll be like, okay, well, what does that song feel like as a color or whatever? And then I'll like put that up as the computer backdrop while I'm sitting. Just the things to try and trick your brain into being in the right mode. And I think it made the stories feel more fully realized. And then the guys, apparently at the time, I was like, they must be so bored of all these Pinterest boards because they don't reply when I send them. I don't know if they're looking at them. But then afterwards, they said they both found it quite helpful because we were all separated and they would get up the Pinterest and see these things from films, TV, like what artists were we talking? We're talking a lot about like certain photographers and like I think it was I think that helped. And then they knew what kind of feel they were going for with the music. And I don't know, it was helpful because we were so isolated from each other.
Yeah, maybe Hemingway was onto something then. He probably didn't mention Pinterest, but
maybe he would. Maybe I'd be a big pinner. I don't know if I would want to see what he was pinning. But
exactly. Do you write? I notice outside it's nice and bright and sunny there. Do you ever notice if you write outside? If you do you ever notice a difference in the song content or emotion? Versus writing inside or in sunny spaces versus, or does that not matter? I don't know. I just thought of that.
I think sunny spaces are unsettling to me, maybe because I'm Scottish and that's not like, if anything, maybe, it feels like formative memories I have of trying to write art in dark libraries or dark bookshops, or just because, you know, it's like from about September till April in the UK, it's very dark
Right.
a lot of the time. It's very grey. It's beautiful, but it's very grey. And I think for me, I'm like, I guess I associate that with like, I don't know, my style of writing and my formative experiences or something. So if anything, I'm like in Los Angeles, I'm like, shut the blinds, shut the windows. If it's a rainy day, I'm like, guys, cancel the plans. I can't come out. I've got to stay in and like be with my little rainy muse, I guess.
Right. That's good. All right. Last question. So I know you're a voracious reader. Let's talk about who some of your favorite authors are, your genres, who are your go-tos when it comes to reading.
Oof. Oof. Well, I did earlier this year, I read Crying in H Mart, the Michelle Zauner
I
book.
interviewed her about a month ago. It's on my site. Yeah.
She
Great
like
book.
her storytelling. Oh, like so beautifully written. So yeah, I think I wept once a chapter.
Yeah.
Without fail. I had to stop reading it in public places because I was like, this is not going well. But yes, I feel like her voice and her way of storytelling is just so special. But yeah, in terms of classics, I mean, what have I got on my shelf here? Janice Galloway, because a classic's got like, I think I remember reading The Trick is to Keep Breathing and just being floored. And I think in a way that kind of informed the kind of, I had never really read that much like macabre female writing before. And I think not macabre, but like, I guess, you know, and I've read like Mary Shelley and Angela Carter, but that was a very specific kind of that storytelling. And I'm like, but she's talking about present day, non-fantasy, real life stuff that's very harrowing and very dark and very beautiful, but very painful. So I love, and Nick Cave. I feel like every time I get stuck, I'm like, I'll never think of an idea ever again. Then I'm like, maybe you should go consult one of the multiple Nick Cave lyric books you have. And he's so inspiring to me because he is so creative on so many different levels. Yeah. And yeah, like really seems like the definition of somebody who creates because he has to create, whether that's he's going to make a score, he's going to write a song, he's going to write a book, he's going to write some poems. I'm like, whew. And I just, yeah, like his character and his personality is always so evident in his writing. And I think that's the bit I always find most inspiring because you can't, I mean, you'll know better than me, but I always feel like you can learn about the craft, but you can't teach character, you can't teach personality and point of view. And then whenever like, you know, a friend of mine, as you know, when he's been struggling with writing, he's like, how do you write pop lyrics? And I'm like, I think that's the wrong way to ask the question. I'm like, well, what do you want to say? Or what do you want to talk about? And I feel like the most muddled things that we've made are because I didn't know what my perspective was. And I was just kind of somewhere in the middle. And I don't think, now I'm like, no, a strong perspective is scarier to have, but it's what makes the writing more individual, I guess. That sounds like I'm really patting myself on the back, but I've done, you know, written on both sides of that line. And then I'm like, I think it's more divisive, but it's, what's the point in writing something if you're not really writing it, if that makes sense? I don't know. But it's,
yeah. Are there other, back to the reading, are there genres that you prefer, certain authors that you are your go-to authors, you know?
I think for some reason in films, I can deal with like fantasy. I'm not a big fantasy reader. I don't really, I feel like I need things to be grounded in some kind of like human struggle, like a good human struggle novel.
Right.
But yeah, like one of my favorite books the last couple of years was The Girls by Emma Cline.
Oh, okay.
And I just think like her use of language and storytelling, I was like, oh, I haven't heard something like this in so long. And yeah, what else is up here? I feel like I have a good balance between like factual stuff, like memoir-y type things. I find it much easier to dip in and out of, apart from H Mart, which was so good and so harrowing. I was like, I have to get this done now, and then seal this book and hide it from myself forever. But yeah, like I can dip in and out of factual stuff in a way that I can't with fiction. And I think, yeah, non-fantasy, reality-based fiction is probably my favorite.
I try to read every day. I feel like that's a part of my day that I have to have, like whether it's a half hour. I mean, I carve that time at some point out of the day when I feel like if I haven't read, don't feel like the day is complete, you know? And I do try to make that time. Did you try to do that? Like try to read every day?
Definitely something I've come back to because I felt like I was so disconnected from it for so long. Um, but yes, in the last year and a half, I think that was something I was like, well, you have all this time when you're in the house, so you should use this time wisely and read some of these books, because it was getting to a point where I would pick up a book where I'm like, oh yes, I want to read this. I had read an excerpt or I heard about this, and I was just hoarding them like a weird book hoarder. I was like, what are you doing?
Right.
So, and I'm like, yes, you get them, but you get them to read them. You don't just like gather them like
Gather
little
them, right, exactly.
lucky rabbit's feet. But yes, so since I guess since the beginning of the lockdowns last year, even if it's just like little 10 minutes at the start or the end of the day, like it does feel, I feel like a calm quiet, which I don't
Yeah.
feel a lot of other times.
Yeah.